Hare Namaha. A root illegitimacy haunts so-called ISKCON, and that specter has forced it to rely upon a warped narrative mixed with stupid bromides in order to bind its acolytes to the institution. So-called ISKCON is confident that most of those followers will not confront its root illegitimacy. But knowing the story of so-called ISKCON, understanding where it's going, and even more importantly, where it may go up the road, requires personal intelligence transcending the mode of ignorance, and that's done via confrontation within yourself. Actually, intelligence must be in the mode of ignorance in order to believe that that institution's fanatical slogans are legitimate, such as, quote-unquote, ISKCON is one, or, quote-unquote, ISKCON is the Hare Krishna movement. These are two examples of such hackneyed bromides. These trite mottos cover reality. Even if there was some sliver of truth to them, and that sliver of truth only during the brief period that Prabhupada's institution ran well and was bona fide, they certainly have no application or legitimacy now. They are nothing more than a component of Maya's arsenal of unlimited deception. This is part 2 of a 2-point series, as pointed out in part 1. The fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation is now in its 3rd transformation, which entails bureaucracy, as was the case in the previous change, the 2nd transformation. These institutional layers of bureaucracy serve as buffers in order for the institution to protect its core, which in point of fact is incredibly weak. The foundation of so-called ISKCON is figuratively built on sand. His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was the founder and spiritual master of his branch of the Hare Krishna movement in the mid-60s. He incorporated it at that time, and it received the moniker of ISKCON. His movement was bona fide and ran reasonably well for about a decade, although there were some serious speed bumps even during his manifest presence, particularly in the final years. The story of so-called ISKCON is the story of 3 transformations that went down after the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada from physical manifestation. It is also the story of 3 deviant entities, only one of which is so-called ISKCON itself. The first transformation of that institution was the sudden and diabolical takeover of the movement by 11 quote-unquote zonal acharyas. Less than a decade later, the second transformation was the result of a brewing backlash against those imitation Prabhupads. The backlash is also called by your host speaker the collegiate compromise. It went down inside an already unauthorized movement and it was just as deviated as the initial takeover, but in a different way. In due course, it had to transform into the Hindu hodgepodge. That change, despite being a major transformation and different from the collegiate compromise in both pulse and tone, was not a change in paradigm. The first transformation actually changed the movement's paradigm in the late 70s. The second transformation replaced the zonal scheme with another one in the mid-80s, and that was a different paradigm from the first transformation. We are still in that bureaucratic paradigm at this time, although the fourth transformation has gotten its camel nose under the tent. Returning to stage 2, the collegiate compromise of the second transformation had fatal flaws embedded in it. First, it could not keep the grifters out in the field fired up enough. Secondly, many of the leftover newcomers, initiated by one of the 11 new gurus, were aggressively pushed into what became known as quote-unquote reinitiation. Unlike the fatal flaws in the first transformation, and those were pointed out in part 1 last month, the primary flaw of the second transformation was a cataclysmic drop in revenue. The newcomers received improper initiations from bogus gurus, but they were initiated, not in the right way, but via bogus bijas, initiated nevertheless. However, those seeds were received from men in the first transformation who were mostly charismatic. In other words, they did not at all rely upon either the vitiated GBC or any bureaucracy in order to create their own set of dedicated followers, many of which were fanatics. Stockholm Syndrome set in within the mental quantum of hundreds of new young men and women. They came to love and dedicate their lives to the charismatic guru at their center, read prison house of their choice, invariably a center within the guru's zone, the zonal acharya's zone. The newcomers were willing to do whatever the master ordered, and all of those despots wanted them to collect money for the acharya of the zone. This was not at all discouraged by the various presidents of the centers in those zones for reasons that require no explanation. So, heavy-duty collection. Pick the bone and bring it on home. Most of the newcomers engaged in that way on a daily basis for many hours of every day of every week, and accordingly, capital inflow was never an issue during the heady days of the zonal era. With the collegiate compromise, however, the air quotes ISKCON gurus were busted down to Madhyam Adhikari, although in actuality, none of them were anywhere near that stage of advancement. Instead, they all remained the sahajiyas that they always were, but now were forced to institutionally function at what appeared to be that lower octave. This did not apply to all of them, however, because some left the movement while others were removed. Uncooperative gurus kept cutting high profiles of self-apotheosis, like they previously projected during the first transformation. But all the manipulators, approved gurus by the vitiated GBC, who remained in the good graces of so-called ISKCON and that vitiated entity, no longer could project the illusory Uttama taste that so many of their followers became addicted to and wanted to keep experiencing. Institutional charisma is always inferior to personal charisma. By 1987, all the remaining air quotes ISKCON gurus were of the institutional variety. Previously, during the first transformation, they had only depended upon GBC imprimatur for their appointments and zones, and after that they neglected the fledgling bureaucracy, which hardly really existed. This caught up with them in the mid-'80s, however. The story of so-called ISKCON is the story of three groups of bogus initiators, improper initiates, skewered teachings, concocted processes, and a bogus narrative for each of the three groups. We are certainly not going to ignore the later massive bureaucracy, and that will be covered near the end of our presentation. But some primary background, along with foundational facts and history, must be laid out first. Concerning genuine Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not an artificial imposition on the mind. It is not a concoction. It is by far the best yogic vehicle for everyone on earth, and for that matter, everywhere in the universe. It is the best vehicle to perfect the human opportunity and become liberated from the cycle of birth and death, known in Sanskrit as samsara. It does not matter who you are in terms of conditioning your guna karma. That does not matter. Gender does not matter. Your age does not matter. Your financial situation does not matter. As long as you are in the body of one of the 8,400,000 species of human life, which includes all of the demigods who are vastly more powerful than any human, you are eligible to relieve yourself permanently from suffering and return to the eternal realm of form and activity in the spiritual world. You can do this through the teachings and processes known as Krishna consciousness, and only through those teachings and processes. You cannot accomplish this through institutions, teachings, processes, and warped histories, which are, in actuality, perverted reflections of Krishna consciousness. There are so many countless neophytes throughout the world who were eventually forced to wake up, to some extent, due to the ways they were mistreated, mostly by so-called ISKCON. Yet, they only partially awaken. They still think that they can attain Krishna consciousness through some kind of concoction that legitimizes their initiations from bogus gurus. This they cannot do, but they are nevertheless convinced that they can. You cannot enter the spiritual realm simply by ABCD knowledge and processes supplementing based upon what is actually nothing but a series of concoctions. In that kind of institution or assembly or confederation, your initiations are not at all helpful. On the contrary, they are major stumbling blocks. Worse than this, you are not only misleading yourselves, you're misleading others by bringing them to your centers. It may be Prabhupada-centered, and you may be Prabhupada-centered, and that's commendable, but such sentiment is not enough. You have to genuinely confront the situation for what it is. Prabhupada brought a perfect process here. Perfect process. The tattva and siddhanta connected to guru and initiation must be expertly attuned to the transcendental fruit, which was perfectly passed down from the top of the tree until it reached those who needed it at the bottom of the tree in order to work their way up and themselves attain siddha, or spiritual perfection. However, these improperly initiated people, the burnt, fried, and deep-fried people, in most cases, misled by actual Prabhupada initiates, are flooding the world with either sentimental or fanatical so-called Krishna consciousness, and this is not what Prabhupada wants. Deviations of any sort will not help us. All of these, are disqualifications for reaching the goal of siddha, which means mukti, and then reaching samsiddha, which means vimukti in the spiritual world of form and activity. Group-think perversions of so-called bhakti cults, many of which are backlash reactions formulated and formed by devotees who foolishly cooperated with so-called ISKCON during the stages of its transformations. Such cults are not where you should be placing allegiance, focus, and your energies. Instead, confront. Dig down deep to the roots which caused all of this deviation to transpire. Insist upon putting the pieces of the puzzle together in the right way in as much detail as you can. Understand the story of so-called ISKCON for what it is, not merely as a tragedy. Understand its first inimical backlash, Niyamat, for what that is and how it was responsible in a very big way for attacking Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement immediately after he left. See all of yesteryear's and today's Niyamat gurus for just what they were and are. See them as traitors. See the Ritvik backlash for what it is. Heresy, heresy. Ritvik has nothing to do with the Vaishnava process. It is an Eastern version of so-called Christianity. Dedication to Prabhupada in the here and now does not entail receiving initiation from him after he has departed physical manifestation. The leaders of Ritvik are misleading thousands of innocent, or perhaps more accurately, semi-innocent, people into an unauthorized phantasmagoria. Although never advertised in this connection and only in one particular way, so-called ISKCON is actually pleased by these two inimical splinter groups. Now, it is not pleased when it loses people to either Niyamat or Ritvik. However, Niyamat and Ritvik serve a purpose for so-called ISKCON because the institution uses its own fanaticism in order to inject particular fear into its followers. And what is that fear? It is the fear that if you don't surrender yourself completely to so-called ISKCON and its vitiated governing body, then Maya will arrange to lead you into either Niyamat or Ritvik. As alluded to previously, these three splinter groups are the chief deviations. There is no spiritual shelter in any of them. There is only temporary, illusory shelter provided. They are not conduits to spiritual perfection, which must be your goal in coming to any yogic group. They are instead conduits to sentimentalism, fanaticism, and sahajiism. And they have their own backlash offshoots. Later backlash offshoots from them, some of which cooperate with the deviation of their first connection, and some of which go completely independent. All of these, they have no genuine spiritual and devotional underpinnings. They cannot take advantage of the gateway to the eternal world provided by the Guru Parampara. Without quotation marks on each side of the acronym, ISKCON was fully converted into its perverted reflection in the spring of 1978. This has been pointed out throughout my presentations, as well as the fact that this conversion was a gradual process to some extent and had been going on even while the founder Acharya was still materially manifest. 4 months after he departed, however, everything exploded. As could only be expected, some things appeared to be the same as that new transformation took over, although there were egregious differences. A bit later, there was a backlash against the first transformation, in no small part because it was so restrictive and despotic concerning Guru. The world was divided into zones for 11 pretender Mahabhagavats. There was not enough room for even a pin to be driven into it for any other gurus, and by quote-unquote gurus, we mean so-called acharyas. This bred frustration within the hearts of senior men who considered themselves entitled to also be spiritual masters, although it's dubious that any of them actually were. That developing situation of the backlash, however, was itself a major event slowly brewing, and the slow horses made trouble for the big boys. The new gurus made mistakes in setting up their first transformation, and 2 of those were more prominent than the others. Besides exclusivity, they took malefic advice from a godbrother of Prabhupada's, one who knew just how to manipulate them so that their effort would eventually fail. It would take some time, but only after the seeds of their desires to become worshipped as great devotees reached fulfillment was the descending octave of the first transformation set into motion. The 11 great pretenders chose to depend upon the vitiated GBC, which to some significant extent they controlled, in order to create those concocted zones of exclusivity and thus become the only devotees authorized to initiate. Both of these mistakes would come back to bite them big time. This backlash would culminate in the bureaucratization of the movement via the second transformation of the mid-80s. We find the following dialogue by a bishop representing a Christian cult, in which he attempts to suppress the doubts of one of his parishioners, a peace officer investigating a double murder in that specific Christian congregation. Quote, "I'm not an academic, nor am I an historian, so I never concern myself with such deep dives. I don't go digging in the past, and neither should you. You place your trust in today's prophet, and you leave the things you do not understand on a shelf." Unquote. Western damage control is required. This is also how Eastern or semi-Eastern apostatharmas and chaladharmas function. Mystery, secrecy, and authority lurks within an atmosphere of fear, and it comes out whenever there's doubt. And if someone who has that doubt experiences a shock connected to some scandalous topic or murderous topic, especially when some belief controversy also surfaces connected to it, it creates even more doubt. Ultimate legitimacy of the institution is certainly within the category of an integral topic. The leaders of such religions or cults have their claim to legitimacy pinned upon some source code supposedly representing perfect, unassailable authority. And it's a mystery how it works, and there's secrecy connected to it. And all the followers are enjoined to never question that conduit, and if they do question, they're enjoined on penalty of excommunication, ostracism, hell, and possible death. Read murder. Indeed, it is invariably found in all of these cults or religions that the claim to each of them being the only way to heaven or the spiritual world, although these destinations are not one and the same, by the way, the only claim is through strict adherence to the authority intrinsic to its so-called source code of legitimacy. However, actually, it's all about power. That source code is rarely ever discussed. It hovers both above and behind everything, but its power to create fear of becoming a reprobate and being condemned by the religion is not supposed to be subject to any analysis. You don't dare analyze it. However, we do dare to do so. We do discuss a particular source code here, and you all know what we're discussing, don't you? Obviously, the GBC is integral to this claim of, air quotes, ISKCON legitimacy and connection to its alleged line of spiritual authority is supposed to be the only way to Vaikuntha or Goloka. First of all, the power intrinsic to secret claims of authority and the mystery of why you must be in the good graces of that power at all times, it must have some kind of evidence in order to even endure. And by the way, you should realize this fact. There's going to be some kind of evidence. But is it conclusive evidence? Even if the deviations of the cult, and again, we're emphasizing so-called ISKCON here, even if those deviations are readily apparent to the intelligence of clear deliberation and discrimination, air quotes, ISKCON leaders must be able to present some evidence. It cannot keep loyal adherence if it cannot do that. So it does that. It has some evidence. Here are two examples of such evidence. One, the governing body commission, GBC, will be the ultimate managing authority of the entire International Society for Krishna Consciousness. All of you know that's from the Final Will and Testament. And two, quote, we have therefore established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Anyone who is trying to be aloof from this Krishna Consciousness Society and yet engage in Krishna Consciousness is living in a great hallucination, for this is not possible, unquote. That's from a purport in the Bhagavatam. Now, the first quote is connected to the GBC, and the second one is connected to ISKCON. But that was the ISKCON of yesteryear. So-called ISKCON now is the glove, and the vitiated GBC is the hand within that glove since the late 70s. What the first excerpt seems to establish is that the GBC is the ultimate authority. The second excerpt or quotation appears to establish that no one can become Krishna conscious except through approved association with and within ISKCON. There are other evidences besides these two which could be cited. However, in the opinion of your host speaker, there is no need to do so, as none of those other ones is as provisionally potent as these two individually are. In a court of law, when the jury gets its instructions and enters into deliberation, it will have evidence, often quite powerful evidence, that separately seems to justify either the prosecution or the defense. When we confront the root of so-called ISKCON and its claims, it's all about power. Although it may appear to be all about what is presented as evidence, it all comes down to power. You have to have the courage to confront that fact in order to free yourself from the doubts evinced by the evidence presented. A recent document or position paper circulated by a reformist faction in the former Yugoslavia, this document centers upon two major, air quotes, ISKCON deviations. Although technically the vitiated GBC is not directly involved in the book changes, it allows them. Indirectly, therefore, it's culpable. If it has passed a rule which requires everyone in its movement to only read the edited books, then, if that's the case, it becomes directly responsible at that point. However, if we want to actually confront the root of all the superficial institutional problems, we have to go deeper than criticizing the symptoms. That means to recognize first the prakshepa-atmaka separating energy. We have been separated by it from what was our original motivation to join the Hare Krishna movement. Realize this. We have lost the plot if we have become so victimized, but it does not stop there. We must also consider the avaranatmaka shakti, which then covers us over. Part of that is the illusion of reform. It also covers us with various pleasures derived from the new deviations of the deviated cult. You get more sense gratification than before. After all, it's much easier to be quote-unquote Krishna conscious in this current warped manifestation than it was to be actually Krishna conscious when it was conducted in a bona fide way decades ago. Tattvamasi. Now, as far as child molestation is concerned, agreed. It's a very horrific symptom, but nothing more. It's a symptom of the fact that the molesters, and there were and are many of them, take advantage of lax oversight, or in some cases no oversight at all, combined with their own individual material absorption in order to engage in such nefarious pleasures. With these two symptoms, edited books and molestation, the basis for the complaint in the position paper, it becomes conclusively evident that this document does not get to the roots of the problem. That is its major flaw. Indirectly, it is but another covering. However, the worst flaw in that document is that it's a reform appeal, which, as mentioned, is but another feature of the avaranatmaka shakti. These devotees who are pushing this in their document, reform, are at best wasting time. At this stage, there can be no reform of so-called ISKCON. It's warped beyond the ability for it to be reformed. You will not be able to transcend the covering potency that is so-called ISKCON if you advocate reform. When does it stop? You'll keep advocating on, and it'll keep deviating on and on. It means that you will continue to believe, you will continue to have faith that the current so-called ISKCON is non-different from Prabhupada, but it just needs reform. The Uvaranatmaka Shakti of that cult will cover you over with various society, friendship, and love entanglements unless and until doubt reaches a certain stage, both subliminally and consciously. At that time, the Shakti will flip upon itself and cover you over with different emotions headed by fear and, if applicable, guilt. The position paper keeps calling the institution ISKCON without utilizing necessary quotation marks on each side of the acronym. That moniker, free from quotation marks, is only applicable to corporate ISKCON. The current entity is the so-called ISKCON Confederation, controlled by the vitiated GBC. And by the way, there's no greater ISKCON either. That's another concoction. Neither so-called ISKCON nor the vitiated GBC can be reformed, not at this late stage of their devolution. The position paper points out that a big part of the problem is that the devotees under the whammy of the Apasadharma, referring, of course, to so-called ISKCON, keep sticking with it and not speaking up about its deviations. That is ultimately due to fear, and I think they point that out also. Unfortunately, as long as the paper's authors keep pushing reform, in effect, they're in the same category. Just a different division of it, that's all. They actually refer to so-called ISKCON as Prabhupada's movement and the Hare Krishna movement. It is neither. It is a broken arrow, a deviation engaged in covering Krishna consciousness in the name of spreading it. They claim that it is dying. What's wrong with that? Nothing. It should die. Why are they so adamant to insist that they are not against ISKCON, but only against the corrupt GBC? The GBC is the hand, and the institution is the glove. They're integrally linked. And you need to ask this question also. Does ISKCON, without quotation marks, does ISKCON even exist anymore? We know that it's perverted reflection, and Apasadharma exists, but does even ISKCON exist? Prabhupada wrote in 1972 that it could be killed. And by the way, the document we're referring to here offers us that quote. Nice. And what about these quotes? Quote, "We have worked very hard and established a great institution, but if we think for our personal benefit, then it will be ruined. This is my only concern," unquote. Quote, "If you adulterate our Sankirtan movement with some business motive, then it will be spoiled immediately. Be careful in that way," unquote. Quote, "And I am surprised that none of the GBC members detected the defects in the procedure. It was detected only when it came to me. What will happen when I am not here? Shall everything be spoiled by GBC?" Unquote. Quote, "Become yourselves free from all doubt. On this platform you shall be able to carry on the work satisfactorily. But if there is lack of knowledge, or if there is forgetfulness, everything will be spoiled in time," unquote. Prabhupada said that his movement could be killed, ruined, and spoiled. There are direct excerpts from his letters. These are what I've just read. Why is it so incomprehensible that exactly that is what has gone down? Quote, who needs the GBC? Unquote, the paper asks. At the same time, they want to reform the governing body in order for it to become ABC, Advisory Board Commission. One concoction after another. The evil intrinsic to that entity will not be eradicated by reform, but that evil will morph and remain integral to it via any so-called reform. Realize this before it's too late. Ironically, the author of that position paper and his favorite sannyasi, whom he cites throughout, are also engaged in allowing everything to drag on because they insist that ISKCON can be reformed. Although none of it will be acted upon, how many more reform proposals will continue to come down the pike? Simply put, valuable time is being wasted. ISKCON is dead. It was killed decades ago. Not dying. It is dead and gone. It's gone. The unauthorized entity that has killed and replaced it becomes more corrupt by the day. But it still has some momentum. Its influence is not terminated, but its legitimacy is terminated and has been terminated for decades. Are these people really exposing so-called ISKCON and its vitiated GBC? You cannot have as many flaws that are contained in their document in order for it to have any lasting effect. They will continue to accept the potential of an allegedly possible purification of ISKCON, but all of that's a pipe dream. No matter what goes down in the future, it means more and more hell is coming, with more and more reform propaganda responding to each level of hell. Expose, check, terminate. That's the only solution. Terminate the influence of the perverted institution. The Chaitanya Golden Age will emerge only after this, air quotes, ISKCON apostatharma is cleared. We all know that Prabhupada declared Gaudiya Mat asara or useless in a purport to Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, chapter 12, text 8. We should declare the same thing about the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation and its puppet master, the vitiated GBC. The governing body is a criminal entity allowing criminal activity to continue to thrive. Those who, out of fear combined with attachment, cling to the propaganda of so-called ISKCON and the GBC as the only way back to Godhead, are all being sucked deeper into the ISKCON black hole. Taking radical action is what is actually required. Without realization and without radical action, the deck cannot be completely cleared for the emergence of the Golden Age, which is now stuck under the roof of a potent triple empire of the mind. And what is that triple empire of the mind? So-called ISKCON, Neomat, and Ritvik. Institutional elitism replaces zonal megalomania. Introduced in the mid-80s by the Collegiate Compromise, the paradigm of ever-increasing bureaucracy continued in the third transformation. It will continue to do so as the Hindu hodgepodge and so-called ISKCON is about to be replaced by another change coming soon to a theater near you. Yet, none of this amounts to a paradigm shift. Realize this. The zonal acharya imposition was certainly a paradigm shift from Prabhupada's prescriptive paradigm. There was virtually no bureaucracy in so-called ISKCON during the big gun zonal Acharya era. The second transformation of the collegiate compromise was a paradigm shift from the zonal scam by introducing bureaucracy into an already deviated movement. But you need to realize that actually Prabhupada didn't favor the big guns. Quote, regarding your questions, you say that amongst the elder disciples there are still symptoms of greed, anger, strife, bickering, etc. But you're one of them. You're one of the old students, so you fall in that group. So the fighting is amongst that group, but not amongst the real workers, unquote. The zonal imposition was all about big boy elitism. The disease of stratification and elitism is, in this age, always present in any organization of scale, and this, most unfortunately, is particularly the case when it comes to organized religion. It was present in ISKCON, yes, but Prabhupada did not approve of it. All right, he had some pet disciples, granted, but the real ISKCON movement was supposed to be a spiritual meritocracy, which is the exact opposite of a bureaucracy. The bureaucracy emerged with the damage control necessary for the second transformation in the mid-80s. Such bureaucracy needs to accelerate with the aid of buffers in order to keep from backsliding. In effect, it replaced one set of elites with another one. It consolidated and crystallized its power via mega-institutionalism. Power is where power is believed to be. Although not advertised as such, its challenge, as it turned out, and we did cite this earlier, and it was not foreseen by the leaders, its challenge was revenue enhancement, which it was unable to create. In fact, it decreased it. Its power rested upon the vitiated GBC, especially during its emergence. That was one of the weaknesses of the 11 pretender Mahabhagavats, and those who were also voted in a bit later in the early 80s. They were all implicated in GBC imprimatur. Even Kirtanananda made that mistake. He cooperated with the bogus appointment, allegedly from Prabhupada, which we have called for decades the appointment that never was, and he also, Kirtanananda, accepted his own. Big mistakes on his part, but we're happy he made them. In the beginning of the second transformation, it was a hardcore, limited bureaucracy in its primordial stage. Innovation and expansive trends or processes in the movement had to be stabilized and made compatible to the bureaucracy. If they were not, they could pose a threat to its eventual massive implementation which was planned. As could only have been expected when it started to gain traction, it was anything but a bureaucracy in 1987, at the time the new paradigm emerged. In order to perpetuate that new scam, there had to be a major emphasis on institutional form. In order to stabilize and morph into the soft power bureaucratic paradigm it is today, it needed to come up with institutional solutions to all the new problems. However, the second transformation created those new ones, along with what it still had to deal with from the scandals generated by the zonal acharyas, particularly scandals which came from its most egregious sector. The second transformation's institutional solutions were, in essence, different from the innovations that emerged during the previous paradigm, and of course, almost all of those innovations centered around the pick. Now, in the second transformation, you had the program of reinitiation. We mentioned it before. Reinitiation was integral to one of its proposed solutions of the second transformation. Now, this idea worked for a short time, and it aided the development of bureaucracy, although a bit indirectly. It had an intrinsic flaw to it, however, in that the replacement guru, who was basically nothing more than a rent acharya, could himself experience an egregious fall down sometime up the road. What would be the implication then? It would necessitate another quote-unquote reinitiation. Indeed, once some of the newcomers were on their third so-called initiating guru, it would be impossible for them not to consider that they were entangled in a fix-it-as-you-go scheme, which they definitely were. However, this quote-unquote reinitiation, this supposed solution, did accomplish something, no doubt about it. It bought more time. So-called ISKCON always has been and continues to be expert at kicking the can down the road via fix-it-as-you-go. It more or less had to deep six the reinitiation stuff due to the multiple guru factor just described, along with a black swan event. What was that black swan event? The emergence of the Ritvik heresy in late 1989, which then expanded throughout the 90s. This Ritvik idea, which gained quite a bit of traction, certainly was a threat to the, air quotes, ISKCON bureaucracy, and it remains so to this day. Today's, air quotes, ISKCON bubble has mostly replaced high-flying mega-charismatic gurus with institutional gurus via a bureaucratic paradigm. Sure, it has a couple or three big-profile gurus, but there are reasons for that. Those big guys accept the GBC, and when it suits them, they take advantage in order to also climb the latticework of the bureaucracy. Things are intentionally made complex in so-called ISKCON. It has well-established committees, such as the ones which are required to rubber stamp a candidate for becoming a new guru in the organization and then determining how many years he has to remain in queue before final approval. We'll call these standing committees. It has steering committees, and it has temporary subcommittees. It has a very well-known complaint committee. Bureaucratic committees act as effective buffers in order to protect the vitiated GBC. Quote, and if I did not interfere, the whole thing would have been killed. Do not think in this way. A big corporation, big credits, centralization. These are all nonsense proposals. Management, everything should be done locally by local men. Accounts must be kept. Things must be in order and lawfully done. But that should be each temple's concern, not yours. Krishna consciousness movement is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. Once there is bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled, unquote. That intentional complexity is inevitably followed by shallow expansion. The hard power, bureaucratic approach of the 80s has now morphed into the soft power, loose expansion of the 21st century in so-called ISKCON. Everything is getting watered down. But as long as there's numbers, then the argument can be made that the movement is still successful. You can become neither self-realized nor God-realized in such an environment. This should be self-evident to one who is sincere and serious in spiritual life. And thus you will not find such people in so-called ISKCON. A big bureaucracy is a ticket for acceptance by the host culture, and so-called ISKCON recognizes this fact. Make no mistake about that. a big bureaucracy is also an insurance policy for the cult, because that means it cannot be easily destroyed by forces from without. The Western world is still functioning according to the nation-state paradigm established at the Peace of Westphalia. The kings have been mostly replaced in that paradigm by congresses and parliaments. Most of these nation-states are considered to be democracies or democratic republics, but really that's only a superficial consideration ultimately. The deep state is the bureaucracy that pervades the whole of their interrelationships, both within and without. Many of these nation-states are plutocratic pseudo-democracies within the nation-state paradigm. So-called ISKCON has found acceptability, a niche within that paradigm. The cult's massive soft power bureaucracy of today meets with unexpressed approval by the host culture. The nation-state paradigm is going to crater. What exactly its replacement will be is known only to the higher demigods and the Parameshvara. However, we can see the symptoms, can't we? Massive technology is present in our lives in almost every action we take. The postulated thesis would therefore be the emergence of the technocracy as the next paradigm shift in the Western world in particular. And let me tell you, it will take over in a tyrannical fashion. It will have to do so in order to prevent the impending chaos which gave it the opportunity to triumph in the first place. Besides a one-world government, will it choose to also have a one-world religion advising it? With so-called ISKCON, with its international presence, Hindu constituency, and sprawling bureaucratic network, would so-called ISKCON be a prime candidate for attaining power behind the curtain of the technocracy? The colossal hoax, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, is a pseudo-spiritual scam. The story of so-called ISKCON is the story of one concoction after another. At this time, it's only dangerous if you enter into its wheelhouse. Such might not be the case in the future, as its bureaucracy, which was specifically condemned by Prabhupada, its bureaucracy represents a future threat to the world at large. So-called ISKCON is an illegitimate entity, and it fears being exposed as such. It needs to be exposed now, and we're doing that. It needs to have its momentum checked and reversed, and it needs to have its influence terminated. If that is accomplished, the next paradigm shift of the Western world superstructure, the technocracy, won't risk affiliating with so-called ISKCON as its backdrop advisory board to its new world order. Sadeva Saumya